Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Savell, and I'm the new Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Federation. I am so excited to be here tonight for this wonderful collaboration of the Westport Library, the Westport Country Playhouse, and the Jewish Federation. Our local Jewish Federation not only creates programs like this, like the one we're going to do tonight, to bring the community together around issues that interest everyone, but we also raise money in humanitarian relief in Israel, in our community, around the world, and of course, right now in the Ukraine. And we want to thank everyone that has responded to us in this incredibly critical need for help in the Ukraine. The Jewish Federation is delighted to partner tonight with the Westport Library and the Westport Country Playhouse tonight, particularly because A Play for the End of the World is a perfect example of a book that transcends culture, which, interestingly enough, as many of you may know, is a theme that is woven throughout Jai Chakrabarti's novel as well. We were fascinated by the fact that the play was written in 1912 by an Indian author, was actually performed in the Warsaw Ghetto by Jewish children as a way to bring them comfort. And we were further intrigued to see how tonight's guest author used that real life form of protest to create the narrative of the novel we are here to discuss tonight. In 1942, Jai's author notes tell us this play was mounted in a Warsaw Ghetto orphanage, where a Polish Jewish educator and a doctor known as Pan Doktor hoped to give his charges a way to persevere through dark times. And now a little bit about our featured guest, Jai Chakrabarti. His novel, A Play for the End of the World, won the National Jewish Book Award for debut fiction, is longlisted for the Penn Faulkner Award and a fall 2021 Oprah magazine pick. He is also the author of the forthcoming story collection, A Small Sacrifice for an Enormous Happiness. His short fiction has appeared in numerous journals and has been in the O. Henry Prize Stories, the Best American Short Stories, and awarded a Pushcart Prize. His nonfiction has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, the Writer's Digest, and Lit Hub. Jai was an emerging writer fellow with a public space and received an MFA in creative writing from Brooklyn College. And he is a trained computer scientist. Born in India, he now lives in New York with his family. I also want to welcome tonight's moderator, Lonegan, who is an assistant artistic director at the Westport Country Playhouse and founding artistic director of Egg and Spoon Theater Collective, an off-Broadway theater based in New York City. Before founding Egg and Spoon, Liam received his BFA from Syracuse University, like me, where he was the managing director of Black Box Players while directing and assisting on numerous productions. I know you are really going to enjoy this evening's program. You can post all of your questions or your comments into the Q&A box at any time during the conversation. And now, please join me in welcoming Liam and Jai to our virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Karen. Oh my gosh, SU alum. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And of course, Jai, a huge thank you to Jennifer Keller at the Westport Library, and Stacy Camisar and the Federation, and Karen, of course, and the Federation of Jewish Philanthropy for Upper Fairfield County. Both Stacy and Jennifer, I'm sure Jai can attest, have been instrumental in putting this evening together, and really were the brains behind it. So thanks to both of them. When I was asked to join to facilitate today's discussion, I couldn't resist. And you'll quickly learn why. This novel brings about an irresistible amount of feelings about our world, about art, and about human beings trying to make sense of the moment. And I'm privileged, of course, to be joined today by Jai, author of A Play for the End of the World, and that you have the artwork behind you too, the beautiful artwork. I love it so much. Thanks so much for being here, Jai.
Thank you so much, Liam. It's so great to be here with you tonight, and I'm grateful to the Westport Library, to Karen, Stacy, Jennifer, everyone who's organized this, and to the community who's here with us tonight. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, me too. If you wouldn't mind, let's just pause on the book for a minute and begin with you a little bit, because I'm also so personally interested. If we could just start at the beginning, can you talk us through your childhood a bit? When did you first discover writing? When did it seriously enter your life?
Sure. So I was born in Kolkata, India, and during the latter part of my childhood, moved to the United States. And when I came to America, I really didn't understand a lot of English, couldn't really speak English very well. And so for me at that point, writing served as a way for me to start to understand the world around me, and for me to sort of contextualize what it was that was happening and what I was feeling and experiencing. So I really see myself as emerging into becoming a writer as a child. And it's always connected to that experience of moving across countries. And I think many writers or many artists probably feel that way too, that this sense of translocation brings about this need to figure the world out, to express who you are.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any specific pieces of writing that you remember? They could be anything that were kind of influential and inspiring to you.
Influential for me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we, when we used to go to India in the summers, we didn't have access to the amazing public libraries that we have, of course, here with all the great books. So I would take stacks of books with me. I would actually take the O. Henry Prize stories. Like I would take like the last few years. I love and continue to love that particular collection. I would take stacks of the New Yorker. I think I learned how to write short stories from reading stories in the New Yorker. So those kind of come to mind. I mean, I also, as a child, was a big reader of fantasy and science fiction. I no longer write fantasy or science fiction, but for me, it was a great way to kind of just explore my imagination. And so Ursula K. Le Guin is someone that I really loved as a child and still love today.
Oh my gosh, those are great. And how full circle about the O. Henry stories, since you're featured in them now.
Yeah, that was a big honor.
Obviously, personally, I'm sure. And wait, so I just learned from Karen's introduction about computer science. Where did that fit into your life?
Well, when you're a first generation immigrant, I would say that you are encouraged to pursue things outside of the humanities. And I was always also good at math and computers. And so it seemed like a, good vocation to cultivate in addition to the writing. And so I've been blessed to have two paths that I've been able to pursue throughout my life.
Great. And so when was the moment for you where you decided or knew for sure that writing was it professionally? And did computer science just immediately leave, or was there some kind of transition?
I always have in my mind, I'm always dealing with imposter syndrome. Let me just say that. And I'm always dealing with questions of, am I really cut out to be a writer? That is something that is constantly, something that I deal with. So I would say it hasn't really gone away for me, and I perhaps we'll talk about this as we go along, but for me, the research process of writing this book, which was about discovering artists who had written or produced art in the darkest of times, helped me as someone who was dealing with existential issues about their own art, figure out what is the value of my writing in this world, what is the value of it to me. And so that research process was actually something that I found to be sustaining for the rest of my writing life, really. To date.
Oh my gosh. You hit me with the imposter syndrome. It's it's real for any artist of any level too. I was just interviewing directing fellow applicants for the Playhouse. And just over and over again, all of us, including me, and for anyone that doesn't know, imposter syndrome that Jai mentioned, it's basically when you're in a situation which you deserve to be in, a situation you deserve to, a room you deserve to be in, and suddenly, yeah, I mean, I always think, is this the production I'll be found out that I'm not meant to do this?
Yeah, totally.
And oh gosh, but yes, we will definitely talk about that process for sure. And after it kind of solidified for you that this is where you needed to be, I'm sure your writing has changed, but are there any large trends with the types of things you're writing, or the style, or your voice?
Sure. So when I first started writing fiction, and I'll back up a little bit and say that before I started writing fiction, I wrote a lot of poetry. Mm-hmm. And I still think about the lyric verse as this like really foundational aspect from which so much writing comes. Mm-hmm. And when I'm stuck as a writer, I will actually go back to poetic forms and think, okay, is there a way that I can structure this story like a particular poetic form, like the villanelle or the pantoum or the zuhitsu? There's all these choices to play with. Uh-huh. And when I first started writing stories, they tended to be very magical. I mentioned that as a teenager, I was reading fantasy and science fiction, and I was reading a lot of magical, surrealist fiction as well at the time. And I would say one of the trajectories for me has been to move more towards character-driven fiction that aims to look at the situation how it is, rather than takes magical departures. I think I have deep love still for magical realism and for surrealism as well. But in my own work, I've tended to move more toward character-driven fiction and still sort of find the space for the surreal slant moments rather than that to be the primary driver of the fiction.
And was that just natural, you think, that progression, or was it caused by something?
I think that I have a deep, deep love of listening to people. And at a certain point, that passion for understanding how people think and wanting to represent that in what I wanted to be an honest way overtook my desire to represent a scene in a magical or surreal way. Like I really wanted people to show up on the page as they were.
Wow, that's amazing. It almost sounds like you're investing more and exposing more of the humans that are there, rather than focusing on the world you're physically creating.
That's right. I think with a lot of magical realism, you feel the authorial voice.
Yes.
Right. So you feel that the author has a kind of intention here. And sometimes it can feel like puppets are in the service of the author. Yes. And as I have grown as a writer, I have tried to take myself as the author away from the experience of the reader as much as I can and allow the scenes to happen as they will. And, a lot of my process as a writer is about getting closer to characters. I would say there's probably some commonalities between perhaps what you do as a theater person and some of what I do to get close to my characters. And so I'm really trying to get rid of that filter as much as I can.
Wow, that's right. As time goes on and I read more in new plays, that come in at the Playhouse and things that we're going to produce. Yes, like you're saying, you can feel the playwright's hand, over it. But it's when you become secure as a writer, and when I talk to playwrights as well, you find yourself responding to the characters rather than physically creating them. That's great. Oh, I love it. All right. Well, let's move a little bit into this book specifically. And now, we've talked about wanting this conversation to be fruitful for people who have both read the book and haven't, A Play for the End of the World. But maybe I think it's appropriate, if you think it is, if you wouldn't mind reading the full author's note, or at least,
Sure.
Okay.
Sure thing.
Might set it up. I know Karen talked about it a little bit, but.
Okay. On July 18th, 1942, weeks before the deportations to Treblinka, the Polish Jewish educator, medical doctor, and author Janusz Korczak staged a play at his orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. The performance was an adaptation of a Bengali play, Dakkor, by Rabindranath Tagore. Dakkor literally means the calling house. Nowadays, it's translated as the post office. Rabindranath Tagore wrote Dakkor in a village in India in 1911. A couple of years later, W.B. Yeats produced an English version. The play was then translated into many languages, and eventually a Polish copy ended up in the hands of Janusz Korczak, known to his children as Pan Doktor. The play is about a dying child living through his imagination while quarantined. Pan Doktor chose to stage the play to help his orphans reimagine ghetto life and to prepare them for what was to come.
Wow, that's great. And can you introduce us, and without giving everything away, but I don't think there's any spoilers, to our main sort of characters that we're following, at least the main three? Sure.
So there's Yarek, who, when we begin the novel, is a young boy living in Janusz Korczak's orphanage. Janusz Korczak, who was born Henryk Goldschmidt, the Polish Jewish educator, children's author, extraordinary human being. And so Yarek is a young child who plays the part of Amal in this play in Janusz Korczak's orphanage, and goes on to escape and survive and emigrate to America. He is joined by his close friend Misha, who is 10 years older than Yarek. And the two of them make a life together in New York. I mean, they find jobs, and it's quite a bit later, when Yarek is 40 years old, that he begins to fall in love with a woman from the American South by the name of Lucy. And Lucy, does not have a shared history with that Yarek and Misha has. So she's, really coming in almost as a foreigner to their world. But Yarek develops a strong romantic relationship with her, and the story goes from there.
I love it. And what you alluded to before about the research process, I think you told me, and the last time we met, about how this idea came to you. Maybe, I think, museum, or can you talk to us a little bit about how you were first introduced to this idea to write this piece?
Sure. So many years ago, I was living with my partner Ilana in Jerusalem, and we visited Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial, and there was an exhibit there called Art in the Ghettos. And part of that exhibit was about Janusz Korczak, Henryk Goldschmidt, and how Korczak had staged this play. And when I learned which play Korczak had staged, it was, for me, a really transformational moment, because the play, The Post Office, or Dakkor as it's called in Bengali, was one that I was really familiar with from my youth in Calcutta. In fact, I've been involved in a performance of it in an Indian school.
Oh my gosh.
So here I was with my, Jewish wife in Jerusalem at a Holocaust museum, encountering a play that I had first learned about as a child in India. And I will always remember that moment, because I wanted to know why this particular play was performed. What did it mean? Why would art be invoked in the darkest of times? And so that question stayed with me through the years. When I went to graduate school, I had the fortune of studying with a scholar of the Warsaw Ghetto. And with his help and with his expertise, I was able to really immerse myself in the archives and the story of that time, and really figure out, all the facts and the different people who were involved, and start to piece together that story. And it was only then that I started to realize, well, there's maybe a story here that I want to tell as well, after kind of having this experience.
Right, right. And so after that experience, what, was it a bunch of research after that? Had it waited, or did you just kind of dive right in?
I didn't feel comfortable starting to write the book until I had a solid research foundation.
Mhm.
And, I think this is going to be different for different books. I want to be super careful here, because if there are writers in the audience, I'm not suggesting that you do a ton of research before you start writing. But for this book in particular, I felt it was really important for me to be able to, for example, visit Janusz Korczak's orphanage in Poland, to be able to study with Korczak scholars, to be able to read his diary. I did not feel like I could represent the story without immersing myself in the research that I needed to do.
Right, right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, could you consider this historical fiction?
Yeah, it would be considered historical fiction.
So it makes sense, and in a very specific, time in history, and also specific person. So you're getting even more down to the microscope of what's important, and that makes complete sense. What feels, I don't know, I'm sure your relationship to the book has evolved and changed and grown, especially over the last 2 years. What feels so pressing about this story right now?
Oh, yes. So yeah, there are different
Big
dimensions to
question.
that. Yeah, it's a big question. Firstly, I'll say that, so this book is about a child who's living in quarantine. I mean, the play, I'm sorry, is about a child who's living through quarantine. And so having experienced that sense of isolation during the pandemic, I had a different appreciation for the play that's at the heart of this novel. And of course, therefore, also for how Janusz Korczak thought of bringing this play, and how he might have imagined it affecting the lives of his children as well. But thinking about this moment that we're in now with the war in Ukraine, I've been thinking a lot about theater in general and art, and what is the role of art in times of war. And so I've been thinking about groups like the Belarusian Free Theater, and Bread and Puppet, and a number of organizations like that, who have found ways to share stories and in community. And I think that's so important for me as an artist, that stories be told in community. When I think about the performance of this play in Warsaw, which happened, the last occasion was July 18th, 1942, it was to all of Jewish Warsaw. So you had prominent figures who were there at the orphanage, who were experiencing it together. And I don't have to tell you this, Liam, but I think that's one of the gifts of theater. It's one of the gifts of art, that it brings people together to have the courage to be able to say what can't be said, to be able to narrate the stories that are meaningful for us in this moment.
Wow. Of course, it's encouraging to hear you say that. Of course, over the past 2 years, we've been struggling through this pandemic, which is now, I think was just today, killed 6 million people, now comparable to the 6 million Jewish victims who were killed in the Holocaust. And it caused many, including myself, to question the power of art, because my job was totally taken away from me at the Playhouse when I had to cancel its season in 2020. And it wasn't just my job, but the way, like, you know, what you're alluding to, the way I connected to the world, like my vocabulary. And I also run a small company that had to cancel everything we were planning and everything we'd built. So there were moments when I was furloughed where I seriously wondered if theater actually mattered.
Yes.
Like, did it make any difference to people who were dying and who needed to be in quarantine, who couldn't be in community with others, like you're saying? And I had two friends that quit the industry and became social workers. And I thought, oh, should I go into medicine or something that will actually help people? But what you're saying is, yeah, I mean, what is the role of art, of storytelling in times of crises? And that's the...
Yeah, I think, one of the gifts of Holocaust literature is that you get to have this perspective on folks who have experienced trauma and how they approach their own art. And so when I think about somebody like Abraham Sutzkever, who wrote poetry in the Holocaust, and he has a poem in which he describes hiding from the Nazis in a coffin. And you think about, well, is that a place to write poetry? And of course it is, like it's those places when we are in the deepest crisis that art is important, I mean, I think it's most important in those places of crisis. And I think what you see in literature of trauma, in Holocaust literature and other literature of trauma, is that people are continuing to come to art because it is vital for them in those moments, because there is often a political message that they cannot defeat using political means or using other means. But what they can do is that they can make art and they can start to change the vocabulary around which these conversations happen. There was a playwright by the name of Safdar Hashmi who put on plays in India in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, who was one of the inspirations for a section of this novel, actually. And Safdar Hashmi would go on to be assassinated by the government for putting on plays. So, and someone once asked him, well, do you think that your plays matter? And I should also say that Hashmi's plays were very direct action oriented. So he would bring in workers and laborers, and his goal was to improve their wages. He was trying to illustrate their, the calamity of their working conditions and really work to improve their day-to-day lives. So this is somebody who's, not doing theoretical art, not doing abstract art, but really engaging in direct action. And so he's asked this question, well, do you think your plays matter? And what he said was that he didn't think that it had a direct impact on the situation at hand, but he felt that it was changing the vocabulary by which we were going to have these conversations, that it was creating space for us to have a different narrative around who these workers were, what they meant, like what their problems meant to us, and to bring in their narratives into this larger story that we talk about. So I've always remembered that. It's been an inspiration for me. I think about that, with Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela in South Africa, and how they as artists were also extending the vocabulary, right? Like allowing us to enter into a narrative that wasn't possible without their music.
Oh my gosh, yeah, a direct form of resistance. I'm gonna think about that, the change in the vocabulary. You can see even now at the Playhouse, as we're suddenly opening up again and creating hopefully a full season of work, you can totally see it, Jai. There is a pre-pandemic kind of theater, and a post-pandemic, just the way writers are writing the stories that are important, the way people interact, the kinds of theater we want to see too, after seeing so much Netflix and seeing,
Right.
that, like everyone really, I mean, I really want to go to the Met to see large scale, 30 people on stage again. Yeah, but you're right, changing the vocabulary, that's it. You were talking about this a little bit before, but if you could just dive in a little bit deeper too, what about the post office feels appropriate for extraordinary circumstances?
Well, firstly, it's about children. And, I think that when you have a play that's centered around children, it allows us to, let's say, take off some of the skeptical layers we might bring into a situation, because we're interfacing with little kids. And I think Tagore was very aware of that. I think he had a particular message in mind, and he thought, well, how can I bring the audience along? And I do think that like the child actor, and especially children acting this out, is like a really effective form in this case. But the play is fundamentally about cultivating your imagination. And I think the imagination is the most powerful weapon that we have in any circumstance, right? This is about a child who cannot leave their house. So they have to, so this child has to cultivate and do, they're dirty. I'm so sorry about that. That's
No, you're fine.
Children, that's my 6-year-old asking whether the dishes are clean or dirty.
That's okay. My dogs are growling in the back, so you're fine.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity for kids to exercise their imagination, and therefore for the audience to be part of that journey.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, the children, I didn't think about that, how important, and then how necessary in Warsaw to be activating that imagination, which is the direct, the reason why that was chosen. Okay, I have a few more questions, but I just want to warn the audience that after these questions, we're going to be able to open it up, like Karen mentioned. So if you have any questions that you're thinking of, feel free to write them in the Q&A. Having escaped the deportations, Yarrick uncovers a lot of complicated feelings throughout the novel, and most notably survivor's guilt, which I had heard a bit about, but before reading, but after talking with Stacy and really diving in, how would you describe what that is? I mean, it's a little bit self-explanatory, but.
Sure. So I would describe it as, there's some scholars who have referred to it more as shame, which I think perhaps is a more visceral way to describe it. So the shame that one might feel after experiencing trauma that has affected people in different ways. And perhaps you're someone who has gone on to survive it better than others, and you have a certain sort of shame, residual shame that you feel toward that.
That's great. It becomes very central in the novel. Was this something that you had thought about initially, or did it kind of come naturally as you started to write?
So my goal as a writer is to really follow the characters' journeys.
Right.
And the way that I do this is I keep character journals. So with Yarrick and with Misha and Lucy, the three main characters, I probably have hundreds of pages worth of journals where I'm writing in their voices. Wow. So my goal is, as much as I can, to try to relay their story as if they were people who I loved, who I know, who I care about. I do feel like I feel like I still care about these characters a lot. So my primary experience is to follow their journey rather than trying to impose on the book my own sort of agenda about survivor's guilt. What I will say, though, that I think for Yarrick and for Misha, their experience of trauma is very different. I think Yarrick has a more typical experience of trauma in that he doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to put it under lock and key. He wants to keep it away from Lucy in their early relationship. Whereas Misha is somebody who doesn't mind engaging. In fact, he wants to learn more about what happened in 1942. He wants to go to classes and lectures and so forth. So that's also, I think, something that's interesting, which is that it's not unary. The experience is different for different people. And that was also something that I found in my research, is that there's so many ways that people experience the trauma. I mean, this particular trauma and others as well. And I wanted in the characterization of Misha and Yarrick to be able to show that there's a diversity of experience there.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. If funny enough, we used to have to do that in acting school, is write in the voices of our journals and in the voices of our characters. And it does, you naturally not only get to know them, but they evolve and grow throughout the time too that you're writing. That's really beautiful. Speaking of, I forgot, I meant to ask this earlier, but speaking of Lucy's such an important character. And before I started reading, I just assumed, I think because of the, reading the quick, not synopsis, but the book cover, or that it was going to be mostly about Misha and Yarrick. But not long after you start, you realize how central Lucy is. Why? Yeah, what's her role in all of this to you, or what role does she play?
Well, I think that, so I spent most of my adult life in New York City. And I think New York City is one of those places where you can fall in love with someone who is completely different from you. I think cities in general enable that. Which is not to say other places don't, but I think, New York City, it just has that vibe. And so Lucy and Yarrick are two very different people. And Lucy just does not have the context, the history of what has happened to Yarrick, to Misha, or that broader history at all as a woman who grew up in the American South. And also is a bit younger than Yarrick when she meets him. So in a way, she is not only learning how to fall in love with him, she's also learning about his history and encountering the complexity of that. And so perhaps for some readers, like Lucy, they will be encountering the complexity of that history as well. So I think, she gives kind of let's say, a new perspective to everything that's happening.
Right, and we kind of follow her perspective, like we start to learn about Yarrick. That's great. There's one phrase that has really been sticking with me since I was reading, and in the moments when Yarrick is escaping, you say, "Sometime between living and dying, the train stopped," and then you keep repeating, "Sometime between living and dying." What do you, and it's italicized too, and of course so much of the book sits there, or our lives sits there, but what do you make of that, or how is it important to you?
Yeah, so that section is about Yarrick's escape from the train that's heading toward Treblinka. And the way that it's rendered is through these fragments where he's retelling the situation, but in different ways. And what I have found is that for traumatic memory, there isn't a single experience of it. Rather, it's something that shape shifts over time, that we hold multiple versions of that in our memory. That as we grow older, our experiencing self and the remembering self start to shift and change, and the remembering self starts to create and manifest different versions of the same trauma. And so for Yarrick, and in that section, when we're talking about those different sections, sometime between living and dying, and then you kind of get a different retelling of the events, those are all different versions of what Yarrick considers to be the truth. So there isn't the truth with a capital T. There are the different ways in which he has internalized that and the ways in which he's experienced it emotionally.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So that phrase brings us back to that moment. Oh,
Yes.
wow. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Well, let's I have just one more question, just as a curiosity, and then we'll open it up. Have there been any responses to the novel that have surprised you at all? I was just personally curious. They don't need to be, but.
I mean, I'm always surprised by how by how different readers come to their own opinions of the characters in the book. And I think that's awesome. As a writer, I want to be able to create space for different interpretations of a scene or different interpretations of characters. So for example, there's some readers who have a very negative view about Lucy, and they're very open with me about it. And I think that's interesting, and I welcome it. I've been somewhat surprised by let's say, the spectrum of responses I've gotten about how people feel about different characters, but I also find that to be really fascinating as well.
Oh, absolutely. When people come to the Playhouse, and someone comes up to me afterwards and says, I didn't respond to that one, and they're very energized about it. I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. Let's talk about it. Why?
Yeah.
Because if they don't say anything, then they're not invested in that, but if they,
Yes.
if they have a perspective of Lucy or another character, that means they're personally investing themselves in it. So
yeah, and that's so, I find that to be deeply encouraging. So yeah, I love the energized responses.
For sure. Okay, perfect. Then I'll invite Jennifer. Yeah, there you are. Magic.
Here I am. Great. Well, thank you both so much. We do have some questions from the audience. We actually have a bunch of questions about the play. So we're going to do that. So one of the questions is, would you talk a little bit about why the play was able to transcend both cultures and both times so easily, and really link Warsaw Ghetto and India together?
So I think that, I will say that the play has been performed in other amazing moments in human history. So for example, it was performed in Paris the night the city fell to the Germans. So this play, for whatever reason, seems to be connected in all of these different moments of human history. But I think specifically for Janusz Korczak in his Orphanage, the play is about children in India, and to be able to take a leap and to go outside of the bounds of Krochmalna Lane where they were, and to imagine there's somewhere else, and that somewhere else is very, very far away, was important to him. I think that, that idea of cultivating your imagination and finding that far away place. And there's a, description in Janusz Korczak's diary where they're talking about this word afar, and how do you explain this distance to India to a child who hasn't left Warsaw, hasn't left Poland. And I think that was an important part for him, in addition to everything else we've talked about, which is that this is a play that's, you know, primarily centered around children. It's a play that involves quarantine, but also this idea that it was about this faraway place. And finally, in this particular play, there is the possibility of redemption. And in the final scene, I would say that is a very hopeful scene that Tagore has written. So I think Janusz Korczak wanted his children to hold their heads up high and to feel like this play was something that would strengthen them for whatever was to come.
So question number 2, when looking for commentary on The Post Office, the audience member found that Tagore corresponded about English translations of the play with Ajit Kumar Chakrabarti. So is this person related? And is this like a way to be connected to the play, or is it just a chance that your last names are so close?
That is, I would say, just chance. My family is not connected to Tagore in any way. But, you know, when you grow up in India, you do encounter a lot of Tagore. Tagore is sort of like the Shakespeare of Bengali literature. So it certainly was an important part of my education.
Although, you know, you could always just make it up that you were related to, I think, why not? So another question is, why did you choose both the fish market and the synagogue as jobs and a new community for them?
Why did I choose the fish market and the synagogue? Right, so just a little bit of context for folks who haven't read the book. So Misha and Yarek end up working at the fish market, and then Yarek a few years later decides that he wants to kind of go his own way, and he ends up working at a synagogue. Well, the reason why I chose the synagogue, I'll say, is because you know, there's a rabbi who has been an influence in my life, and I think there are parts of the rabbi who's represented in this book that have a correspondence to him. And I was probably looking for a way to put a little of him in this story.
Homage.
And does this rabbi know?
I mean, I've given him a copy and he's read it.
That's all you need. That's all you need. So now Westport, you probably don't know, is a huge writing town. So we always like to know what your process is for writing. Now, you did say that you did a lot of research, but when you're writing a book, like, are you one of those people who like wake up at the crack of dawn or before dawn to write, or you get through it at some point during the day? What's your process?
Sure. So, I mean, you may have heard my 6-year-old. So my writing process has shifted as I have become a parent. So I really do try to do most of my writing early in the morning before the family wakes up, and because my schedule is kind of unpredictable once the day gets going. And yeah, I'm definitely a morning person. My process is that I'll start with journaling, and then I will do 20 minutes of writing. I'll take a pause. I'll do some more journaling. And when I say journaling, I mean journaling in the character's voice. And then I'll write some more, and I'll kind of do those sessions for as long as I have the stamina to do it.
Wow, terrific. This has been so much fun, Jai. I think I can honestly say, on behalf of everyone with the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy and the Westport Country Playhouse, we have enjoyed this book. and we can't wait to see more of your writing. So definitely let us know when you're ready to do a tour in person, because I think we're getting ready for that.
Okay.
And hopefully we can make that happen. And oh, nope. I just thought I saw another question jump in, but nope, that's it. So I want to thank you so much for taking your time tonight to join us. And remember, for those of you at home, read it, enjoy it. The library has some copies, and in the chat, you can find a link to purchase a copy if you like. And Jai, we really thoroughly can't wait for the next book that you're going to put out. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the Westport Country Playhouse and the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy, thank you all for attending tonight.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Thank you all. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.